Now, one of the first things that I want to make sure that we talk about today is how to open up Perfect Effects 8 using multiple different platforms. My thought is that a lot of you guys out there are using other programs. You're using things like Lightroom, Aperture, and Photoshop as a base program. You're using it as a base application to get started and do your very simple kind of editing process. Maybe in Lightroom, you like to use the library, or if you're in Aperture, you like to use the adjustments tab. Lots of different options that you have, but each one of these applications gives you the ability to go straight with an image into Perfect Effects. So I want to go through each one to show you how that works. So we're going to start out today using Lightroom, and then we'll jump into Photoshop and Aperture, so you'll be able to see all three of them. And when you're in Lightroom, you have two different ways that you can get into Perfect Effects. The first is by right-clicking or control-clicking on an image. I have a photo up already that I've already gone through and done some very simple basic editing to. So I'm going to go ahead and right-click on my image and scroll down to Edit In. From there, you'll see Perfect Effects 8. And when I select it, it'll ask me whether I'd like to edit my original file or a copy of my file, and I'm given the ability to select what type of copy I would like to have. This is really useful when you're working on RAW files and you want to create kind of a layered PSD where you do lots of different retouching and effects additions and all that kind of fun stuff. You can also change your file format here to JPEG. If you know you're going to do a very simple edit and then you just want to post it up online really fast, you can change that here. So you have lots of different ways inside this dialog to adjust the type of image that you're going to edit. So for this photo, I'll leave it as a PSD file. I can play around with things like bit depth and resolution. And once I'm done, I'll go ahead and click Edit. And then it'll transfer me over into Perfect Effects. Now, once I'm inside Effects, we'll do a very, very quick kind of introduction to what the interface looks like. On the left-hand side of the screen, you're going to find your filters library. These are all of the different base filters that you can use to build your own customized presets and looks for your images. You've got your preview right in the center of your screen. And then on the right-hand side, you have your filter stack. This is where you can stack multiple different filters to kind of make your own customized style. And then the filter options pane, which looks empty right now, but this will pop up and give you the ability to customize every single filter that you apply to an image. So it's very simple to add a filter. Just go over to the library on the left-hand side, open up any category you're interested in looking at. I opened up the vintage category just by clicking on it, and I can scroll through and see if I can find one that I'm interested in adding. I'll go ahead and click on this one right down here. It's called Red Yellow. And we'll click to apply it. On the right-hand side of the screen in the filter stack, you're going to see that it's added this vintage filter on top of my original image. So we never have to just destroy our original photo. We're always going to be given the option of starting over and given the option that I can erase any of the filters that I don't necessarily like, which is really helpful. So I don't have to worry about messing up and not being able to start again. And then down below, you'll see that the filter options pane has adjusted. Now it's popped up and we get all these different options and sliders that we can play around with. And each one of these different filter categories that you're going to see on the left-hand side of the screen, the filter options pane will be different for every single one of them. Now, for the vintage filter, we can adjust the vintage style, which is just a color that's being applied to your photo. Right now it's set to oatmeal, which is this kind of warm, reddish brown tone that goes over the whole photo. You can hover your mouse over any of these different options and it will actually show you a preview of what it's going to look like when it's on your image. One of my other favorites is called Ocean. It's this nice soft faded teal look. So go ahead and select oatmeal. We can choose the amount or how intense it's going to be on my image. I can scoot this over to the left to kind of decrease that color so it's not quite so intense. And then we also have a saturation slider, and this is just the saturation of the base image. It doesn't affect the color that we're adding with the vintage layer. So I can either saturate my image below even more, or I can desaturate it to get kind of a lighter, almost hand-colored film style look. Now, once I'm done, up above in my filter stack, I have the option of adding another layer on top of this one. So right at the bottom, you're going to see a plus and a minus button. The minus button is going to delete this layer if I click it, which we don't want to do. So I'm going to click on the plus button, and it adds an empty layer, and now I can stack another filter on top. So it's very, very easy to go through and kind of create these cool customized stacks of different filters that you really like. Now for this image, we can go through and let's add another one. I'm going to jump over to the left-hand side and open up the sunshine category. This adds a soft, subtle, high contrast look, as well as a very soft glow to the image. It's just a really nice way to pump up the photo and make it look a little bit more vibrant. And we've got all these different options here. Now, one of the other things that you'll notice is anytime that I hover my mouse over a preset, this little flag will pop up in the top left-hand corner. That gives me the ability to save a preset as a favorite. If I know that I really like it, you'll see that down here there's this sunshine filter, and right up to the top left, the flag has already been filled in. And that is because I use this one all the time. It's one of my favorites, so I like to make sure that I have access to it. So let's go ahead and choose the one that we're going to apply and add it to the photo. Down below in the filter options pane, you'll see that we have a couple of different sliders here. We have an amount slider, which is how intense the sunshine that's being added is. And we can either pull that down or we can intensify it. You can hand adjust the warmth. So you can actually make the photo a little bit cooler or a little bit warmer just by playing around with that slider. We want to save some of that warmth from the vintage layer, so we're not going to go too far over. And then we also have a saturation slider down here, and we can either desaturate the image or we can add a little bit more punch to it. Now, the last slider, which can be really useful, especially on portraits, is you have a glow slider. And this just adds a very, very simple light glow to the image. It softens everything in the photo. I usually keep the slider down below about 10 or 15 because it's really, really strong. So if you go really far over, it's going to add this huge, bright, angel-like glow. So I like to keep it pretty subtle and drop that down pretty low. Now, in the filter stack, you have a couple of other sliders here that you can play around with. Right up at the top, you have the master opacity and the layer opacity sliders. The layer opacity slider just affects the opacity of the layer you have selected. So right now I have the sunshine layer chosen. If I take the layer opacity and move that to the left, it'll leave the vintage layer below, but it will remove the sunshine filter. So we can play around with the opacity of individual layers, or we can play around with the master opacity. These will adjust all of the different filters that you have in your filter stack. So when I move the master opacity to the left, it'll slowly start to bring back my original photo. So if you add a preset and you just don't want to have to go through and select every single layer and adjust the layer opacity, you can take the master opacity and scoot that over just a tad to kind of lessen each one of those different effects applied. Now, before we exit the program, I want to make sure that I save this as a preset. Presets are the best way to work here inside Effects. They give you the ability to reapply a really cool filter stack that you created and re-access it. So these are two filters that I use on a pretty regular basis, and I apply a lot of vintage stylings to my photos, especially for clients. And so I want to be able to bring another photo in here and add both the vintage layer and the sunshine layer that we created. And we made adjustments to each one of those. So I wouldn't be able to go back and just click on one of the filter presets on the left-hand side, and it would magically remember all of those different slider changes. So saving a preset will help me do that. Up in the top left-hand corner of your screen, you're going to open up the preset drop-down menu and scroll down to Save Preset. You want to go ahead and give it a name. I like to give it something really basic and really straightforward so I can remember what it is. So I might call this warm vintage preset. I can place it in a category here. You have tons of different pre-packaged presets, which I'll introduce to you in just a few moments. You can also create your own category. So you'll see that there's Johnny and Liz's presets in here. I'll go ahead and choose my category. And then I can type in a creator and a description if I want to. And then when I'm done and click create, it pops over into the presets library. So right up in the top left-hand corner of your screen, we've got the filters tab open. When you click on presets, it'll show you all of those different categories that we were just looking at. I'll open up Liz's presets, and you'll see there is warm vintage preset. I also have a cross-processed HDR look, which doesn't look quite so good for this image, but it looks a little bit better on landscape images. And I can open up any of these different categories and take a look at what's inside. Now, these PE4 presets are ones that are included with effects when you get it. So you can actually open any of these up and we can take a look inside. I want to scroll down to that vintage category because it's one of my favorites. And you have a lot of really, really cool stylings in here that you can play around with. Now let's go ahead and I'm going to apply these changes to my image and we're going to launch back into Lightroom because I want to show you some of the other programs that you can work with Perfect Effects through. Now, what it's going to do when you're going through Lightroom is because we created a copy of our original photo, it's going to have our original image right next to our after photo, which is really nice. In Lightroom, it's something called stacking. It stacks two different photos together that are of the same origin, and then you don't have to worry about losing your original or your processed photos. So it's really, really easy to find what images you're looking for. All right, so it's going to bring us back in Lightroom here, and we can take a look at our before and after images in our library. We've got our original photo and our new after image. Really, really, really simple adjustments, just a couple of moments, and we have this cool kind of warm reddish vintage glow. All right, now let's go ahead and get out of Lightroom here, and I want to jump over into Aperture. Aperture is going to be very similar to what we were just going through inside Lightroom. All you do is right-click on your photo and jump over to Edit with Plugin. This exact same menu is also up in the Photos menu when you scroll down to Edit with Plugin. Now, let's go ahead and right-click, and we want to take this image into Perfect Effects 8. Quickly before we go over and do that, I do like to mention that if you really like the Develop module or the Adjustments tab here in Aperture or in Lightroom, do a couple of those basic adjustments before you bring it into Perfect Effects if you like them. I can do all of the work that I need to inside Perfect Effects, so I don't really use the Adjustments tab here in Aperture, but some people really like it. They use it a lot. So I suggest that if you have kind of a basic routine before you go in and add all of the funky, more advanced presets and stylings, you do some basic things like exposure adjustments, shadow and highlight recovery, that kind of thing. Now, for this photo, we don't really need to do much, so I'm just going to go ahead and edit with plugin, and we'll choose Perfect Effects 8. All right, so once we're inside Perfect Effects, just like we did before, we're going to start out on the left-hand side of the screen, except this time I want to show you how presets work. If I open up any of these different categories, I'm going to open up it's called PE4 movie looks. These are these really cool, like high stylized movie looks that are really, really, really different. They're not very simple. They have a lot of really cool advanced adjustments on them, and they're really fun to apply. You can take a look at any of these different presets, but one of the things that you'll notice is you get these nice previews. However, they're not quite as big as I would like them. I like to be able to take a really nice big look at all of those different previews because I want to see what's going to work best for my image. And this little slip on the right hand or on the left hand side of my screen is not necessarily that large. So when I hover my mouse over any of the different categories, you'll see that there's this little icon that pops up. It's a grid with a play button next to it. That's our quick view browser. And it gives you the ability to do a full screen browse of any of the categories that you'd like to look at. So let's open up that PE4 movie looks. Click on it, and now I get this huge full screen look. I can see these big previews. I don't have to worry about trying to strain my eyes and see all of the little ones on the left-hand side. I've got this nice big view. And you can see all of these different presets that we've got. We've got tons of different effects in here. I'm going to scroll down, and one of my favorites is called Vivid Dream, which has this really kind of strange, hazy, dreamlike quality to it. It readjusts all of the colors. One of the other ones that's really, really nice that I use a lot is called Havana, and it pumps up all of those warm tones in the image, which is really fun. So go through and choose one that you're interested in applying. I'm going to go up to the top and select this one called Cyberpunk, and I'll go ahead and click to apply it. Now, when you add a preset on the right-hand side of the screen, it's going to give you the entire filter stack that was used to create this effect. So there's a tone enhancer, there's sharpening, there's a black and white filter, and there's a photo filter, which is a color overlay on the photo to create this unified look. You can edit any of these different filters if you want to. So let's see what happens if we go through and we turn the sharpening layer on and off. If I click the eye icon next to any of the filters in the filter stack, it will show me what the image looks like with and without that filter. So we'll click on sharpening, and you're not going to notice a huge difference there. So let's try another one. Let's try that black and white filter. That's what it looks like without the black and white filter, and that's what it looks like with. So I can go through and I can play around with each one of these different filter layers and find a way for them to work best for this image. I really like this photo without that really intense blue photo filter, so I'll just go through and delete it by using the delete button in the bottom of my filter stack. And now I've basically gone through and used a preset as a base and created a brand new one that I can save and reuse if I'd like to. Now, if I decide that I don't like a preset at all, you have two different options for adjusting it. The first is by using the trash icon on the bottom right-hand corner of your filter stack. Remember that this is really, really different than the minus button. The minus button deletes an individual filter. The trash button deletes all of them and brings you back to your original photo. So use it sparingly unless you really don't like something and you want to go back. You can also just choose another preset that you would like to apply. So I'm going to open up the landscape category here, and we've got lots of different options. I'm going to choose this one called Golden Hour Enhancer, and I want you to pay attention to what happens in the filter stack on the right-hand side. Go ahead and click Golden Hour Enhancer. You'll notice that it replaced all of the filters in my filter stack with new ones. These presets are replaceable. So you go through, you add one, you don't like it, you add another. You can quickly go through and see what each one looks like on your photo. Now, if you'd like to combine presets, you can actually do that really, really easily. Just go ahead and in your filter stack, click the plus button to add an empty layer. And then we'll go through and let's select the Magic Ocean preset. Now let's go and choose the Magic Desert. That one looks cool. I'm going to control click or right click on a preset, and you get this little menu that pops up. Select Insert Preset instead of Use Preset. When we do that, it goes through and it adds layers on top of the ones that are already in my filter stack. So you can just insert preset after preset to kind of build your own customized look. And I can go through and I can play around with which ones I like, which filters I don't want on my image, and which ones I want to enhance, and so on. I could save this as a new preset. I've got this really cool kind of late summer sunrise, warm golden hour look on my image. It's really different than what I started with, which is really cool. So I can save this and I can reuse this again if I want to. Just like we did before, I'll go up to the preset menu and choose Save Preset, and we could go ahead and give this a name. So we'll call this Warm Summer Sunset Preset. I'll go ahead and place it in my Liz's Presets category and click Create. And I've gone through and now I've customized my own. So play around with these presets and really figure out which ones are going to work best for you, which ones you like to use the most, and which ones you can alter and play around with to create your own customized style. Now, one of the other things that I want to show you here is how to look at your original photo and your after photo. The first thing that I like to do when I'm going to look at my before and after is hide the tabs on the left and the right-hand side. So we're looking at our presets library and we're looking at our filter stack, and it's kind of distracting. So if you click the tab key on your keyboard, it hides both the left and right-hand sides, and now I get this nice big full screen look. I don't have to worry about all that excess information. It's just my image. And then to show my before and after, there's either a preview button on the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, or you can press Control or Command P on your keyboard. And that'll show you your before image. This is what we started with. And your after image. This is what we ended up with. You can click the tab key one more time, and it'll bring all of those different tabs on the left and right-hand side back up. So just in case you press it and you don't know how to get them back, just click that tab key one more time and they'll pop back up. Now, one of the last things I want to show you with this image before we exit and I show you how to get through Photoshop is two of our new filters. They're brand new here with Perfect Effects 8, and we're really, really excited about them. They're called the Adjustment Brush and Adjustable Gradient. You can find them in your filter stack. One of them is indicated by a little brush icon with a plus and minus, and then the other one is a gradient with a plus and a minus as well. So what these do is they give you the ability to make selective adjustments on your image by creating a mask. So I'll choose I'm going to start out with the Adjustable Gradient tool, and we'll go ahead and click to apply it. Now, down below in the Filter Options pane, you want to choose what adjustments you'd like to make. There's basics like tone, brightness, and contrast. You can selectively add detail, adjust the color, and even apply a soft glow. And then inside the center of your image, you're going to find this little straight white line across your photo with these dotted lines on the top and the bottom. This is the adjustable gradient. We call it a masking bug here in Effects. And you can click inside the circle in the center of the bug to move it around. And as I do so, you'll see that anywhere on the top of this masking bug is getting brighter. And that's because it's corresponding and it's having a conversation with the filter options pane on the right-hand side of the screen. That brightness slider is pushed all the way up to 70, so anywhere on the top of this gradient in the center of your screen is getting lighter. Now, you can also rotate it if you need to, just by clicking the little icon on the left-hand side, and I could lighten the bottom of my image if I wanted to. And then the dotted lines on the top and the bottom adjust the feathering amount. So I can either make it a soft edge, or I can pull this together and make it a straight line between the top and the bottom. So you can really play around with what you'd like to do with how this bug is situated on your photo. Now, what I want to do is I want to cool down the top part of my photo quite a bit. The blue in the sky is really soft and very subtle, and I don't like that. I want to be a little bit more intense with the colors. So I'm going to take my tone slider and pull that down. We don't need to brighten up the top part of my photo. And then I'll take my color slider and just move that over to the left. We're just going to cool down the top. We'll add a little bit of vibrance there to really make it pop out a little bit more. And there we go. So we have a completely new image. We've cooled down that top part. We've left the bottom alone, so we don't have to worry about the fact that the field and the trees and the plane are getting cooler. We're just adding that nice soft look up to the top part of the photo. And just like with any of the other filters that you apply, you can play around and adjust that mask if you'd like to. It's one of the best parts about using the adjustable gradient and the adjustment brush tools is you can continually readjust that mask to make it work for you. You can stack this in your general filter stack the way that you would combine with any of the other filters. And in the next photo, I'll show you a little bit more about some of the other masking tools that you have access to. But that adjustable gradient and adjustment brush are really, really helpful. And you can use lots of them. You can use 1, you can use 2, you can use 6, and you can be very selective about what you'd like to edit in your photo. All right, so just like before when we were inside Lightroom, when we click Apply, it's going to go through and it's going to save our final image, and it's going to bring us back here into Aperture, and we can take a look at our before and our after image. So we have our original photo, and then we have the one where we cooled down the sky. Right next to each other, super easy to find. Don't have to worry about searching everywhere. Places it right next to my original image. All right, now let's get out of Aperture and let's jump over to Photoshop. When you're going through Photoshop and you'd like to access Perfect Effects, you can either find it in the pane on the top right-hand corner of your screen. You'll see that I have the On One panel already up, and there's Perfect Effects 8. You can also go up to the Window menu and scroll down to Extensions. That's where you're going to find that On One panel that you're seeing right now in the right-hand corner of my screen. If you don't see it, you want to make sure that you select On One. The other way that you can get to it is by going to the File menu and scrolling down to Automate. And from there, you'll also see Perfect Effects 8. So if you'd like to, you could go through and you can access it in multiple different ways. If you're a big Photoshop user and you like to create actions, you can actually include Perfect Effects 8 in an action that you make in the software, but you have to go through the File menu down to Automate. You cannot go through the panel that you see up on the top right-hand corner. And it's just the way that the software works, but if you really, really love to use actions and there's something that you really enjoy, it can be a really useful tool to include Perfect Effects in that process. But you'll have to go through the File menu down to Automate. Now, when we're ready to take our image into Perfect Effects, we're going to go ahead and click on Perfect Effects 8. And you'll see when I do so, I have right up at the top, Open Perfect Effects. But I also have all of those different preset categories that we were looking at earlier. We have the ones up at the top, which are the Johnny and Liz presets. These are the ones that we made earlier, as well as all of the PE4 ones. What's really cool about using Photoshop is if I select Liz's presets, I've got that Warm Summer Sunset preset. If I go through and I just double click it, it's going to bring me into Perfect Effects. It's going to apply that preset in each one of those different layers. It's going to add those effects, and then it's just going to immediately bring me back into Photoshop in literally less than a minute. So if you know exactly what effect you'd like to apply, you have a preset in mind, and you don't want to have to spend the time opening the software individually, just double click on the preset you want, it'll add it, and then it'll bring you right back here into Photoshop. What's also really cool is anytime that you go into effects, it'll take all of those filters that you apply, and it's going to put them on an individual layer here. So I have the ability to use this layer the way that I would any other here inside Photoshop. So if you have a nice workflow that you like, if you want to play around with masking and opacity and all that kind of fun stuff, you can do that here because it's applied on a separate layer. So now I have my original image, and then I have the one that I applied that warm summer sunset preset to. Now, we're going to go through and we're just going to open up Perfect Effects 8 on its own, and we'll jump into the software. And one of the last things that I want to show you today is a little bit more of the advanced masking tools that you have access to. So when you're in the filters library on the left-hand side, I want to add a really, really obvious filter so we can really see how these masking tools work. So I'm going to open up the split tone category. And I like this because it has these really cool kind of duotone looks. If you're really into that vintage styling, which you've spent the last 35 minutes with me, so you may be suspecting that I really like that look. One of the other categories that you can go into is the antique category, and it adds these really cool kind of subdued, soft, very subtle monochromatic antique stylings to the images, and they look really beautiful. So if you're into that kind of thing, these are the categories that you should definitely play around with. Now, as I mentioned, I want to add one that's really obvious so we can see how these masking tools work. So I'm going to select this one called Auto Chrome Warm. On the right-hand side in the filter options pane, I can play around with any of the different filters that I have access to. The haze slider is one of my favorites. It actually adds kind of a fade to the shadows in the image. So you've got a saturation slider here, as well as a brightness slider, so we can adjust how bright the image is. We've got the haze slider, which will add that kind of soft fade to the shadows, which can be really fun to play around with. I always like to add just a little bit of haze to the photo. And then you also have the ability to add film grain if you'd like to. So if you want to create a real authentic antique look, you can add film grain by playing around with that. Now, if you've been paying attention in this webinar at all, and you were looking at that filter stack, you'll see that each one of the filters that we're applying have these white rectangles next to them. This is an automatic mask that's applied to every single filter. Every filter you use can be masked. Now, we already talked about the adjustment brush and adjustable gradient, and those come with tools automatically. But what happens if you add a filter and you aren't given that masking tool right away? You'll find it up in the top left-hand corner of your preview. This is a little brush, which you can see. This is our masking brush tool. Below is the masking bug, which is that gradient that we showed earlier. And you can select whichever one is going to work best for your photo. It wouldn't really make sense to use a gradient masking bug for this image. That'd be kind of strange. So I'm going to go up and choose my masking brush. Now it works just like any other brush tool. You've got all of your options at the top of your screen. You want to choose what mode you'd like to select. It's set to paint out right now, which means we want to paint out this antique filter. You can change the size, the feathering around the edge of the brush, as well as the opacity of how strong you want to paint something in or out. Now, the last option is the perfect brush. And this is our edge detection brush. It's really, really useful when you want to create very intricate masks. If I go ahead and leave that option off, I'm going to make my brush a little bit bigger. I'm going to click and paint over the brick wall. Now, as I do so, one of the things that may start to be a little bit difficult is getting around all of the objects in the image that I don't want to paint out. I am having kind of a hard time running around the edge of these brick walls and creating a really exact line. The perfect brush is a way for you to get into all of those little tiny places, get around all those difficult edges, and get a really, really clean line. Now, before we turn it on, just so you know, any mistakes that you make in the suite, you can always undo. It's either up inside the edit menu, you can click undo, or you can press Control or Command Z. So we'll go ahead and undo all of those brush changes that we made because we want to make sure that we go back in and we use that perfect brush around the edge. So we're going to paint out the bulk there, and then I'll turn the perfect brush on. This is a really good example of how it uses it. I always like to leave this up so that you guys can take a look. You can use the perfect brush on and off by pressing Controller Command R. And then if you hold the Controller Command key, it will lock the color sample that you've chosen. And that's the way the perfect brush works, is by paying attention to color information underneath the crosshair of your brush. So it's actually a really, really amazing tool to have access to. So let's go ahead and close that. And we're going to go ahead and just start painting out along the edge here. And as I do so, you'll see it's doing a really good job of only painting out all of those bricks and leaving everything else alone. We'll paint out all of those stones. We'll do the same on the right-hand side. Now, if you make any mistakes, if you accidentally go over and, oh no, you painted out this area that doesn't look very good, just go up to the top left-hand corner of your screen and change your mode from paint out to paint in. This mask is always, always editable. So I can go through and I can paint in and paint out to my heart's desire until I get the mask that I'm looking for. And sometimes people are very exact and they want something to look a certain way. And then other times people are okay with it being a little bit looser, a little bit messier. So it's totally up to you, but you have the option of choosing how you'd like these masks to look and how you want them to work. So we can go through and we can create this really cool mask and we can have them in this vintage look, and then everything else could be kind of vintagey and still have that same soft effect. Now, on the right-hand side in the filter stack, you'll see that you have access to viewing that mask. So I can see that it's right next to my antique layer there. I can actually copy and re-access these masks if I want to. That's one of my favorite parts about Perfect Effects. If you go up to the mask menu, you can choose copy mask and then you can paste it onto another layer if you want to. You can also reset your masks or invert them. That's one of my favorite tools. If you go up to the tool options bar and click invert, it'll swap it around and now they're completely in color, and I can go through and I can make my brush a little bit bigger and I could paint out this whole background so that everything else is antique except for them. And that can be a really, really cool effect that you can create. Now, one last little note about masking when you're using these tools and you're going in and you're creating these really intricate masks is these handmade brush masks that we've gone through and we've created aren't saved when you make a preset. So if I went through and I saved this as a preset, that mask would disappear. And it's partially because every single photo is going to have a different mask. So I have probably about 100 photos of this couple from the same afternoon. And let's say I want to apply the same antique layer to a whole bunch of them and mask the couple out every single time. Instead of having to reset a mask and then reapply it every single time, it gives me the ability to start from scratch and repaint in for each individual photo. That is a really, really useful tool. Instead of having to go through and erase a mask that already exists, you get to start from scratch. However, if you use a masking bug in a preset, it actually saves. So if you have a preset where you have a really cool mask where you add a cooling filter to the top of your photo and a warming filter to the bottom, those gradient masking bugs that I was showing you earlier, those will actually save in your preset. And that can be really, really useful because masking bugs are a little bit easier to use and they're a little bit less intricate. They're meant to be a bit more general. All right, let's go ahead and trash that here. I'm going to go ahead and close that up. And I'm going to go ahead and cancel out of this and we'll jump back over to Photoshop here. Now, the last thing that I want to show you guys before we exit is how to use the program as a standalone. As of right now, I've only shown you guys how to get through Lightroom, Photoshop, and Aperture. However, you have the ability to access Perfect Effects 8 as an individual program without using anything else. You'll see that on my screen, I have it down in my dock. on my Apple computer. You can find it in your applications folder. So if it's not already in the dock, just jump over to your applications folder and you'll find it there. And when you select it, it actually opens you up into Perfect Browse. And Browse comes automatically with Perfect Effects 8 Premium. So you don't have to worry about downloading a separate software. They come together when you use the program as a standalone. And it's a way for you to search for images. Instead of having to just go up to a file menu and select open, you can actually get this nice visual look at the images that are on your computer and your hard drives. I have my desktop selected in my sources pane on the left-hand side. And these are a couple of images that I knew I wanted to edit, and so I placed them all into a folder. You can also access portable hard drives you have plugged in. You can access things like Google Drive, iCloud Photo Stream. So if you take a lot of pictures on your phone and you want to edit them in Effects, you can do that. You can access Dropbox, SkyDrive, tons of different options here. When you have a photo and you're ready to edit it, just like we did before, you have the option of choosing whether you'd like to edit the original photo or edit the copy. So to jump into Effects, just select your photo and click on Effects in the top right-hand corner of your screen. When you do so, the dialog will pop up. This is very similar to the one that we saw earlier in Lightroom, and you can edit your original or edit your copy. I'm going to edit a copy because I want to make sure I keep my original photo. I can play around with my copy options, and when I'm done and I click OK, it'll transfer me over into Effects. Now, the last filter that I want to show you guys before I head out and before I answer questions is our new texturizer. And if you have been users of the suite before, if you've had older versions of Perfect Effects, the new texturizer is one of those things that is just so cool. It is so cool. If you like textures and you use them a lot on your images, it is one of those things that is just so awesome to have in your workflow. So you can access it by going over to the Filter Options pane on the right-hand side of your screen and opening up the Filter drop-down menu. Scroll up and choose Texturizer. Now, from here, you're going to open up the Category drop-down menu. And these are all of the different categories of textures that you can apply. We have everything from weather. You can add snow and rain if you want to. We have natural textures like clouds. We have kind of grungier textures underneath the metal category and the photo category if you want that scratchy look. My favorite is the paper category because it's got these really soft, very subtle, fibrous textures that look really nice. So you can go through and you can choose one that you're interested in selecting. You can also then open up the texture drop-down menu. And anytime you hover your mouse over a texture, it's going to show you what it will look like on your image. So each one of these is going to be different for this photo. And I like the ability to be able to access that because then I don't have to worry about clicking and then waiting and clicking and waiting for it to load. So I just scroll through until I find one that I think looks really cool. And underneath the paper category, we have everything from very basic things like folded paper to ones that have kind of cooler ornamental patterns on them to very simple, just subtle textures. Now I'm going to go down and choose this one called Tattered Paper Red. Underneath, you have tons of different options for how this texture is going to be included in your photo. And these are the options that make this texturizer so cool. The first is the mode. This is how the texture blends into your photo. There's normal, which is going to be really intense, and then subtle, which is the more subtle version of normal. There's lighter and darker. Lighter is one of my favorites. You can see that it's applying the texture to the darker parts of my photo. I chose this image specifically because it's a silhouette. So it's taking the texture and it's only adding it and lightening up those darker pixels. Darker does the opposite. It's saving all of those really nice dark shadows in my image, but it's applying the texture on all of my highlights. I love the fact that I have these options, especially when you're working on photos that have high contrast like this. Playing around with the lighter and the darker can really affect how the image looks. So I'm going to choose lighter here. The opacity is how intense that texture is on your image. I can make it really intense, or I can drop it down if I want it to be a bit more subtle. And then down below, these are my favorite options: hue, saturation, and brightness. These sliders only affect the texture that you're applying. So if I take my hue slider and we move it over, it's only affecting the color of the texture that we added. It's not really affecting much of the base image. So those buildings in the background, the blue sky, that's pretty much staying the same. It's only changing the texture that's being applied to my shadows. So I can go through and I can actually choose, maybe I want it to be a little bit warmer, more of a sepia tone color and less of that reddish tone. I can adjust the saturation of just the texture. So I can either desaturate it if I don't want any color adjustments on my image, or I can actually saturate it more if I want it to be really, really vibrant. And then last, I have a brightness. This is just how bright or how dark that texture is. And I can make it lighter or darker. It completely depends on how it's going to blend into your photo. Now, once I'm done, and I do this a lot, is I've gone through and I've adjusted and I've created this kind of customized texture, and I made it work best for this image. I like to save even just individual filter stacks where I only have one filter. I would save this as a preset. I use textures quite a bit, and I really, really play around with how I'm blending them into my photo. So I've made a lot of adjustments to this, and I much prefer the way this texture looks than the one that we originally started with. So instead of having to figure out what sliders I moved when I bring another image in here, I want to save it as a preset so that I know. So preset menu, choose save preset. I'm going to call this customized sepia paper texture and place it in the Liz's presets category and click create. And now, next image I bring in, I can add that paper texture that we just made. I love the texturizer. It's one of those things that is just so cool, and it's one of the aspects of the photo suite as a whole, not even just Perfect Effects, but as a whole. It's one of my favorite things that I can use, and the adjustments that we put in there are so helpful. Instead of just flat adding a texture and not having the ability to really adjust it, we've given you all of these really cool tools to change how it's going to work with your photo. And I love that. I love the fact that I have access to that. So I always like to mention it. Now, when I'm done here inside the program in Effects and I click Save and Close, it's going to go in, it's going to save my image. It's going to apply that effect, and it's going to pop me back into Perfect Browse. And now I'll have my original photo right next to my after image. And I can see them right next to each other. So very similar to the way that we saw multiple images next to each other in Aperture and Lightroom, it'll be very similar here inside Browse. And I'll have access to both images if I'd like to. And I can go through and I can take this photo into another program. I can export it from here. I can do whatever I'd like. But I like the fact that I can see both of my images here together.